Look around the room you are in right now. Everyone you've ever met, everyone you've ever seen on television or passed on the street, every human being alive today, all 8 billion of us. We're all remarkably, almost impossibly similar, genetically speaking. We're practically identical, and that shouldn't be the case. Here is something that keeps geneticists awake at night. Humans have less genetic diversity than a single troop of chimpanzees living in one African forest. Less diversity than many endangered species on the brink of extinction. We are, from a genetic standpoint, an extraordinarily homogeneous species. The math doesn't work. We've been around for 300,000 years. We spread across every continent. We adapted to deserts and ice sheets and tropical forests and mountain peaks. We should be genetically diverse, but we're not. Something happened, something catastrophic, and we still can't fully explain it. If you are settling in for sleep tonight, this is the perfect mystery to drift off to. It is the story of how humanity almost ended, how our entire species was reduced to a handful of survivors, and how we somehow came back from the edge of extinction to take over the world. Subscribe and stick around. To understand why this mystery matters, you need to understand what genetic diversity actually means. Every time a cell divides, there is a chance for small copying errors in the DNA. These mutations accumulate over generations. The longer a population has existed, the more diversity it should have. Think of it like photocopies. If you make a copy of a document, then a copy of that copy, then a copy of that, small errors accumulate. After enough generations, you can tell how long the copying has been going on by how much variation exists between copies. Geneticists can use this principle to estimate how large populations were in the past. More diversity means larger populations over longer times. Less diversity means smaller populations or more recent origins. It is like reading history written in our chromosomes. And when they read our chromosomes, they find something disturbing. The pattern of human genetic diversity suggests that at some point in our past, our population crashed hard. Perhaps to just a few thousand individuals, maybe fewer, we came terrifyingly close to joining the list of extinct species. The leading theory for what happened points to a volcano, not just any volcano. The largest volcanic eruption in the past 2 million years, Mount Toba, in what is now Indonesia, roughly 74,000 years ago. When Toba erupted, it ejected approximately 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. To put that in perspective, the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption ejected about 1 cubic kilometer. Toba was nearly 3,000 times larger. The eruption would have been heard thousands of miles away. Pyroclastic flows, superheated clouds of gas and rock, moving at hundreds of miles per HR would have devastated everything within hundreds of kilometers. But the local destruction was just the beginning. The ash that Toba threw into the atmosphere spread around the entire planet. It blocked sunlight. Global temperatures dropped. Some estimates suggest average temperatures fell by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. In some regions, perhaps as much as 15 degrees for years. This is what scientists call a volcanic winter. Plants can't photosynthesize properly, crops fail, animals that depend on those plants starve, and the animals that depend on those animals starve too. The entire food chain collapses. link by link. For humans living in Africa 74,000 years ago, this would have been apocalyptic. They were already living on the edge, small bands of hunter-gatherers eking out existence in a challenging environment. When the climate suddenly shifted, many of them would have died. The theory proposed by anthropologist Stanley Ambrose in the late 1990s suggests that the human population crashed to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals worldwide. Some estimates go even lower, perhaps just a few hundred breeding pairs. Picture what that would have been like. You are one of maybe a few hundred people alive, scattered across an entire continent. You might go your whole life without meeting anyone from outside your band of perhaps 50 individuals. Your entire world is the people you see every day. If someone in your group knows how to make a particular tool or prepare a certain food, and they die before passing that knowledge on, it is gone. There is no other group nearby to rediscover it. There is no way to look it up. Knowledge is fragile when you are that few, and yet knowledge survived. Not just survival skills, but cultural traditions. The humans who emerged from the bottleneck weren't starting from scratch. They had languages, tools, social structures, accumulated wisdom. Somehow, the chain of transmission didn't break entirely. This suggests the bottleneck wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't like a bomb going off that killed everyone in one moment. It was probably a gradual decline over generations. Populations shrinking slowly, some groups dying out while others clung on. The worst effects playing out over centuries or millennia. That kind of slow disaster might actually be worse in some ways. There is no clear moment of catastrophe, no obvious enemy to fight. Just a little less food each year, a few more deaths than births, children who don't quite survive to adulthood, the slowly tightening grip of extinction. But it also means there was time to adapt. Humans could change their behavior, seek new territories, develop new strategies. The populations that survived weren't just lucky. They were probably the ones that adapted best to whatever was making conditions so hard. Think about that number. Fewer humans on the entire planet than attend a typical high school basketball game, scattered across Africa in tiny, isolated bands, each one unaware of the other's existence, each one a few unlucky hunting seasons away from complete extinction. This bottleneck theory elegantly explains our lack of genetic diversity. When a population crashes that severely, most genetic variation is lost. The survivors become the ancestors of everyone who comes after. All future genetic diversity has to rebuild from whatever those few survivors happen to carry. It is like if you had a library with millions of books, and a fire destroyed all but a few dozen. You could rebuild the library over time, copying and expanding from what survived. But you'd never recover the full diversity of the original collection. Some books would be lost forever. The genetic evidence supports this. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA, which is passed only from mothers to children, suggests all living humans descend from a relatively small group of women. The same pattern appears in Y chromosome DNA passed from fathers to sons. But here is where it gets complicated. Not everyone agrees that Toba caused a human population crash. In fact, Some recent evidence suggests humans may have weathered the eruption better than we thought. Archaeological sites in Africa and India show human occupation continuing through the Toba period without obvious disruption. Stone tools from before and after the eruption look basically the same. If Toba nearly wiped us out, wouldn't there be more dramatic evidence in the archaeological record? A 2018 study analyzed sediment cores from Lake Malawi in Africa and found no evidence of the dramatic climate shift the volcanic winter hypothesis predicts. The region seems to have remained relatively stable through the Toba period, and genetic analysis has become more sophisticated since Ambrose first proposed the theory. Some recent studies suggest the bottleneck might have happened at a different time, or might have been less severe than originally thought, or might have had multiple causes rather than a single catastrophic event. So if not Toba, what explains our remarkable genetic uniformity? This is where the mystery deepens, because even if Toba wasn't the cause, something happened. The genetic evidence for a severe population bottleneck is undeniable. We just can't agree on what caused it. One alternative theory points to climate instability during the Pleistocene epoch. The period between roughly 200,000 and 50,000 years ago was marked by dramatic climate swings. Ice ages came and went. Saharan deserts expanded and contracted. Sea levels rose and fell by hundreds of feet. These shifts would have repeatedly stressed human populations. Good times would allow expansion, bad times would cause crashes. Over tens of thousands of years, multiple smaller bottlenecks could have had the same genetic effect as one large catastrophe. This theory has some advantages. It doesn't rely on a single dramatic event that should have left more obvious archaeological traces. It explains why the bottleneck signature in our genes is somewhat ambiguous. Because it wasn't one bottleneck but several, but it also has problems. Climate instability affected all species, not just humans. If repeated climate crashes caused our genetic bottleneck, why don't we see similar patterns in other African mammals? Why are humans uniquely homogeneous? Another theory focuses on disease. Epidemic diseases can devastate populations incredibly quickly. A new pathogen jumping from animals to humans could have swept through early human populations, killing the majority and leaving only immune survivors. We know this can happen. The Black Death killed perhaps half of Europe's population in the 14th century. Indigenous Americans lost 90% or more of their population to diseases brought by European colonizers. Diseases can absolutely cause genetic bottlenecks. The disease theory is hard to test directly. Pathogens don't leave fossils, but some researchers have looked for genetic signatures of ancient epidemics, traces in our DNA of past selection pressure from specific diseases, and found intriguing hints. There is also a more radical possibility. What if the bottleneck wasn't caused by an external catastrophe at all? What if it was caused by us? Human behavior, human conflict, human migration patterns pushing most populations to extinction. Modern humans replaced other human species as we spread across the world. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, all gone within tens of thousands of years of our arrival. We don't know exactly how this happened, but we know the outcome. We're the only humans left. Maybe the same competitive pressure that eliminated other human species also eliminated most of our own populations. Maybe human genetic homogeneity is the result of one successful group outcompeting all the others, spreading their genes while others died out. This idea connects to the out of Africa theory of human origins. Genetic evidence strongly suggests that all non-African humans descend from a relatively small group that left Africa somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago. That migration itself was a bottleneck. Of all the humans living in Africa at the time, only a tiny fraction, perhaps a few hundred individuals, successfully founded populations in the rest of the world. Everyone in Europe, Asia, Australia, the Americas descends from that small founding group. But this doesn't fully explain the genetic patterns we see. African populations which didn't go through the out of Africa bottleneck should have more genetic diversity than non-African populations. And they do, but not as much more as we'd expect if only the out of Africa migration mattered. The bottleneck affected African populations too. Whatever happened, it happened before humans left Africa, or it happened to the African populations that stayed behind, as well as those that left. The mystery extends to all of humanity, not just the migrants. Let's consider another angle. What if we're looking at this backwards? What if the question isn't what disaster reduced human genetic diversity, but what advantage kept it low? There is a concept in evolutionary biology called a selective sweep. When a beneficial mutation appears, it can spread rapidly through a population, carrying the surrounding genetic material with it. If the advantage is large enough, it can reduce diversity across the entire genome. What if something about being human, some cognitive ability, some social behavior, some aspect of our unique niche, created strong selective pressure that reduced genetic diversity? What if our homogeneity is a feature, not a bug? Language might be such an advantage. Complex language is incredibly useful for coordination, teaching, and cultural transmission. If mutations that enhanced language ability spread rapidly through early human populations, they could have reduced genetic diversity in the process. Or consider social cognition, the ability to understand what others are thinking and feeling, to cooperate and compete in complex social environments. Humans are extraordinarily good at this compared to other species. Strong selection for social intelligence could explain both our success and our genetic homogeneity, but selective sweeps usually affect specific genes, not the entire genome. The pattern we see in human DNA looks more like a population crash than targeted selection. The two mechanisms leave different genetic signatures, and ours looks more like a crash. Here is what makes this mystery so fascinating. We have the evidence. Our genes tell us something dramatic happened. We have multiple plausible explanations: Toba, climate change, disease, competition, selection. But we can't definitively identify the cause. The clues point in different directions. Part of the problem is the time scale. 70,000 years is recent by evolutionary standards, but it is impossibly long by human experience. We're trying to solve a mystery when the witnesses have been dead for 3,000 generations. Another part of the problem is that multiple factors probably contributed. Real history is messy. Toba might have weakened populations that were then finished off by climate change, disease, and competition. Separating the causes might be impossible even with perfect evidence, and some evidence is simply lost forever. The earliest modern humans lived in tropical Africa, where organic material decays quickly. Fossils are rare, archaeological sites are sparse. We're trying to reconstruct a jigsaw puzzle when most of the pieces have crumbled to dust. But here is what we do know. Somehow, against incredible odds, our ancestors survived. Whether it was a volcanic winter, climate chaos, devastating plagues, or brutal competition, some humans made it through. They found food, they found shelter, they found each other, they had children, and from that tiny remnant population, everything we are today emerged. Every civilization, every artwork, every scientific discovery, every human who has ever lived in the past 50,000 years, all descended from those few survivors who refused to let our species end. Think about the odds. Your direct ancestors, going back 70,000 years, had to survive whatever catastrophe reduced our population. They had to survive childhood in a world without medicine. They had to find enough food in a world without agriculture. They had to live long enough to have children of their own. If any single one of them had died before reproducing, you wouldn't exist. Not just you. Every own descended from that person wouldn't exist. The chain from the bottleneck to you is unbroken. Every link had to hold. That is true for everyone alive today. All 8 billion of us are connected through that narrow passage in history. We're all cousins, whether we know it or not, descended from the same small group of survivors. The genetic bottleneck made us one family. There is something both humbling and inspiring about this. Humbling because it shows how fragile our existence really is. We came so close to extinction that our genes still bear the scars. We are not as secure on this planet as we like to believe, but also inspiring. Because we're still here. Whatever killed most of our ancestors, it didn't kill all of them. Whatever almost ended our species, it failed. We're the proof that our ancestors won. We're the continuation of their story. The bottleneck also shaped who we became. When a population crashes, the survivors aren't random. They're the ones who had some advantage. Luck, maybe, but also traits that helped them survive when others couldn't. Maybe the bottleneck selected for social bonds. In a crisis, groups that cooperated survived while isolated individuals perished. Maybe our remarkable capacity for social connection, our need for each other, was forged in the fire of near extinction. Maybe it's selected for intelligence and flexibility. When the world changes suddenly, the species that can adapt fastest survive. Maybe our restless curiosity, our drive to understand and manipulate our environment, is the legacy of ancestors who had to innovate or die. Maybe it's selected for resilience itself. The ability to endure hardship, to keep going when everything seems hopeless, to find meaning and purpose even in suffering. The survivors weren't just lucky, they were tough, and we carry their toughness in our genes. There is a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. The idea that people who survive catastrophes often emerge stronger, more compassionate, more appreciative of life. Maybe something similar happens to species. Maybe near extinction made us better. Of course, we'll never know for certain what traits the bottleneck selected for. We can't run the experiment again with different survivors. We can only look at what we are and wonder what we might have been if history had gone differently. What we can say is that the bottleneck had consequences, good and bad. Our genetic homogeneity makes us vulnerable in certain ways. Less diversity means less raw material for evolution to work with. It means more vulnerability to diseases that can affect all of us similarly. But it also made us one species in a way that might not have happened otherwise. Before the bottleneck, human populations across Africa were probably diverging, becoming more genetically distinct. The bottleneck reset that clock, it unified us. Today, the genetic differences between any two humans on Earth are tiny compared to the differences within most other species. A geneticist from Mars, looking at our DNA without other context, would conclude that humans are one of the least genetically diverse large mammals on the planet. That homogeneity is both a testament to our shared origin and a reminder of our shared vulnerability. We are all in this together, quite literally. Whatever threatens one human population threatens all of us. Our fates are linked by genetics as well as economics. Let me tell you about some of the latest research on this mystery. In recent years, scientists have developed new techniques for analyzing ancient DNA. They can now extract genetic material from fossils tens of thousands of years old and read the sequences directly. This has revolutionized our understanding of human history. We've learned that modern humans interbred with Neanderthals, with Denisovans, with other archaic human species. We've mapped ancient migrations with unprecedented precision. We've identified previously unknown populations, and we've gotten better estimates of ancient population sizes. By comparing ancient and modern DNA, researchers can calculate how many people were alive at different points in history. The picture that emerges is complex, not one bottleneck but several, at different times and places. A 2023 study suggested that around 900,000 years ago, an even earlier human population, or ancestors, before we were fully modern, crashed to just around 1,200 individuals. This bottleneck lasted over 100,000 years. If confirmed, this would mean we've faced extinction multiple times. The 70,000 year ago bottleneck wasn't unique. It was the latest in a series of near-death experiences stretching back almost 1,000,000 years. We've been lucky more than once. Other researchers are skeptical of the 900,000-year estimate. The statistical methods used are new and untested. The confidence intervals are wide. More data and better techniques are needed before we can be sure. There is another fascinating piece of evidence we should consider. When researchers look at different parts of our genome, they find different bottleneck signatures. Some genes suggest more severe population crashes than others. Some suggest different timing. This could mean several things. It might mean multiple bottlenecks at different times affected different populations. It might mean natural selection was operating alongside the bottleneck, affecting some genes more than others. Or it might mean our statistical methods aren't sophisticated enough yet to separate these signals. What is clear is that the simple story, one volcano, one bottleneck, one near extinction, is probably too simple. Real history is messier than that. The truth is likely some complex combination of factors we haven't fully unraveled yet. Let me tell you about something called effective population size. This is a concept geneticists use to describe how big a population appears to be based on its genetic diversity. It is not the same as the actual census count of individuals. A population of 10,000 individuals where everyone has an equal chance of reproducing would have an effective population size of 10,000. But if only a small fraction actually reproduced, if a few dominant males fathered most of the children, for example, the effective population size would be much smaller. This matters because the genetic bottleneck signature could reflect not mass death, but reproductive inequality. Maybe the human population didn't actually crash to a few thousand individuals. Maybe it stayed larger, but only a few thousand actually had descendants who survived to today. In traditional societies, reproductive success was often extremely unequal. Powerful men might have dozens of children while other men had none. Women's reproductive success varied based on access to resources and protection. These patterns could create bottleneck signatures without population crashes. But wait. If social inequality alone could explain our genetic patterns, why is human diversity so much lower than chimpanzee diversity? Chimps also have dominant males and reproductive inequality, yet they're more genetically diverse than we are. Something else must have happened to humans. Here is another twist. When we look at the Y chromosome, passed only from father to son, we see an even more extreme bottleneck signature than in the rest of the genome. It is as if male lineages were somehow hit harder than female lineages. One explanation is warfare. In many human societies, conquering groups killed the men and took the women. This would eliminate male genetic lineages while preserving female ones. If this pattern was common in our past, it could explain why Y chromosome diversity is so low. There is genetic evidence that this actually happened. Around 5,000 years ago, Y chromosome diversity crashed dramatically, while mitochondrial diversity remained stable. Something was killing men, or at least preventing them from having descendants, on a massive scale. Some researchers link this to the expansion of pastoralist cultures across Eurasia. Groups with horses and bronze weapons spreading outward, conquering and replacing indigenous populations. The genetics match, the Y chromosomes of modern Europeans, trace back to a relatively small group of steppe warriors, but this was only 5,000 years ago. Much more recent than the bottleneck we've been discussing. It shows that genetic bottlenecks can have multiple causes at different times. Our genome's record layer upon layer of history, each leaving its own signature. Let me return to Toba for a moment. Even if the eruption didn't cause the main genetic bottleneck, it was still an extraordinary event. Understanding what actually happened during and after Toba can help us understand how humans respond to catastrophes. The Toba caldera is now a beautiful lake in Sumatra, about 100 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide. That is the scar left by the eruption, a hole in the earth where a mountain used to be. The scale of the destruction is almost incomprehensible. Archaeological evidence from India shows a layer of volcanic ash up to 6 meters thick in some places. That is ash that fell from the sky over days or weeks, burying everything beneath it. trees, plants, animals, any human settlements, all covered in grey powder. And yet, above that ash layer, we find stone tools that look essentially identical to the tools below it. People survived. They kept making the same kinds of tools, living the same kinds of lives. The apocalypse came and went, and humanity continued. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing about the genetic bottleneck. Whatever caused it, we survived it. Not just survived, but eventually thrived beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined. The species that was reduced to a few thousand individuals now numbers in the billions. How do you go from near extinction to global dominance? What did our ancestors have that allowed them to not just survive, but eventually flourish? This question might be even more interesting than the question of what caused the bottleneck itself. Part of the answer is probably our generalist nature. Humans aren't specialized for one environment or one food source. We can live in deserts or rainforests, eat meat or plants, handle heat or cold. When conditions change, we adapt. We find new ways to survive. Part of the answer is cooperation. Humans are extraordinarily good at working together. We share information, divide labor, support each other through hard times. A band of cooperating humans can survive challenges that would kill isolated individuals. Part of the answer is culture. We can learn from others' experience without having to experience everything ourselves. A technique discovered by one person can spread through a group, then to other groups. Knowledge accumulates across generations, building on itself. And part of the answer might just be luck. There is a concept in evolution called genetic drift, random changes in gene frequencies that have nothing to do with survival advantage. Sometimes lineages just happen to survive while others die out. We might be here partly by chance. But here is the thing about luck. Over time, luck averages out. If we'd survived just one bottleneck by luck, that would be one thing. But the evidence suggests multiple bottlenecks over hundreds of thousands of years. At some point, survival stops being luck and starts being skill. What skill exactly, that is where we enter speculation. But I think it has something to do with hope, with the ability to imagine a better future and work toward it, with the refusal to accept that this is it, that there is no point in trying, that we should just give up. Every human alive today is descended from people who, when faced with extinction, level challenges, chose to keep going, who had children in terrible circumstances, who believed, against all evidence, that life was worth continuing. That is our inheritance too. But the general picture seems clear. Human history includes multiple periods of severe population reduction. We've been closer to extinction than we knew, and we survived each time somehow to face the next crisis. This has implications for our future as well as our past. If climate change, nuclear war, pandemic disease, or some other catastrophe severely reduces human population in the coming centuries, we've been there before. The species can recover from very small numbers, but recovery takes time. Genetic diversity lost in a bottleneck takes hundreds of thousands of years to rebuild through mutation. If we face another severe crash, we'll carry the genetic scars forever, or at least for as long as our species exists. Some researchers worry about this. Modern technology has created new existential risks. Weapons that could kill billions, pathogens that could spread worldwide in days, climate changes that could make much of Earth uninhabitable. We're not safe just because we've survived before. Others take comfort in our track record. We've faced extinction before, and we're still here. Whatever our ancestors had that got them through, intelligence, cooperation, adaptability, sheer stubborn refusal to die. We have it too. We're their children. We carry their survivor genes. Maybe the lesson is both. Yes, we're resilient. Yes, we've survived catastrophes that should have ended us. But we've also been extraordinarily lucky. We can't count on that luck continuing forever. We need to be careful with the only planet we have. Let me bring this back to something more personal. Right now, as you listen to this, you are breathing with lungs that evolved over millions of years. You are thinking with a brain that nearly didn't exist because our species almost ended. Every cell in your body contains mitochondria, tiny power plants with their own DNA passed from your mother and her mother and her mother before that. All the way back to the survivors of the Bottleneck, you carry them inside you. Their victory is your existence. The Y chromosome in half of humanity traces back through an unbroken line of fathers to men who survived whatever catastrophe reduced our numbers. The mitochondrial DNA in all of humanity traces back through mothers who survived the same thing. We don't know their names. We don't know their stories. We don't know what they looked like, or what languages they spoke, or what they believed about the world. But we know one thing with certainty: they lived. Against all odds, they lived. And because they lived, you are here. Listening to this, wondering about mysteries that are written in your own DNA. You are the evidence that they survived. You are their proof of victory over extinction. There is a beautiful irony in studying the genetic bottleneck. The very uniformity that puzzles us is also what makes us a coherent species. We can receive blood transfusions from strangers. We can have children with people from any part of the world. We understand each other's emotions and expressions. Other species aren't like this. Many animals have subspecies that can barely interbreed. Their populations have been separate long enough to diverge significantly. Humans, despite spreading across the entire globe, remain one interbreeding population. The bottleneck kept us together. Some geneticists call this the paradox of human diversity. We think of ourselves as incredibly varied, different languages, cultures, appearances, beliefs, but genetically, we're remarkably similar. Our diversity is mostly cultural, not biological. The bottleneck made us one kind of being. This has practical implications. Medical research on any human population is usually applicable to all human populations. Diseases that affect people in Asia also affect people in Europe. Drugs that work for one group generally work for all groups. We're interchangeable in ways other species aren't. It also has philosophical implications. The concept of human races, while culturally important, has almost no genetic basis. The genetic differences between so-called races are tiny compared to the differences within those groups. We're far more alike than we are different. The bottleneck made this so. If our populations had remained large and separate for longer, we might have diverged into distinct subspecies or even species. Instead, we crashed down to a tiny group and rebuilt from there. We're all recent cousins. Let me talk about what the bottleneck might mean for our future. We live in an age of unprecedented connection. Information flows instantly around the globe. Diseases can spread from one continent to another in hours. Climate change affects everyone. Some scientists worry that our genetic homogeneity makes us vulnerable. A pathogen that can infect one human can probably infect all humans. A drug that fails for one genetic type might fail for all of us. We've traded the resilience of diversity for the efficiency of uniformity. Others argue the opposite. Our uniformity means solutions that work for anyone can work for everyone. If we develop immunity to a disease, we can share it. If we discover a treatment, it applies globally. Our sameness could be our salvation as easily as our vulnerability. And modern technology is changing the equation entirely. We can now edit genes directly. We can create artificial diversity if we need it. We're no longer purely at the mercy of what evolution gave us. The bottleneck's constraints might be temporary on the scale of future history, but that raises its own questions. If we start editing our own genome, do we risk undoing what the bottleneck gave us? The unity, the interoperability, the shared human nature, the ability to look at any other person and see someone fundamentally like ourselves, these are questions for future generations. For now, we live with the genome we inherited. The genome that carries the scars of near extinction, the genome that links us to survivors, will never know, but to whom we owe everything. I want to take you back. One more time to those survivors. Whoever they were, wherever they were, roughly 70,000 years ago. Maybe huddled in a cave while ash fell from the sky. Maybe watching their children die of disease, maybe fighting off competing groups for the last scraps of food. What kept them going? They didn't know they were saving a species. They didn't know their descendants would walk on the moon. They were just trying to survive one more day, find one more meal, protect one more child. They couldn't see the future they were making possible, and yet their choices mattered. Every time they helped instead of hoarded, every time they cooperated instead of competed, every time they shared knowledge instead of keeping it secret. These choices, made by people who had no idea what was at stake, created us. That is something worth contemplating. Your daily choices ripple forward in ways you can't predict. The small kindnesses, the skills you teach, the hope you keep alive, they might matter more than you know. You are part of the same chain that stretches back to those survivors. That is something worth thinking about as you drift off tonight. You are not just an individual human living a single life. You are the current endpoint of a 300,000-year story of survival. You are the latest chapter in an ongoing book, and the story isn't over. Whatever happens to humanity in the coming millennia, whether we spread to the stars, or face new bottlenecks, or transform into something we can't imagine, you are part of it. Your choices matter. Your life matters. The bottleneck, that we still can't fully explain, reduced our ancestors to a handful of survivors. From that handful came everyone who has ever lived since. 8 billion people today, and counting. The recovery from near extinction continues with every child born. If those survivors could see us now, our cities, our technologies, our billions strong, what would they think? Would they be amazed at what became of their desperate struggle to survive another day? Would they be proud of their distant children? We can't know. But we can honor them by surviving ourselves, by passing on what we've learned, by making sure the chain that stretches from them to us continues into the future. That is the inheritance they gave us. That is the obligation we carry. The mystery of the genetic bottleneck may never be fully solved. Toba, or climate, or disease, or competition, or something we haven't thought of yet. Maybe all of them together, maybe something else entirely. The evidence has been eroded by time, but the result of the bottleneck is everywhere. It is in the genetic similarity between you and every other human on Earth. It is in the diseases that affect all populations similarly. It is in the traits we share, our social nature, our intelligence, our resilience. We are what survived. For better and worse, with all our strengths and vulnerabilities, we are the outcome of a near-extinction event that happened so long ago we can barely glimpse it through the fog of time. We are the children of catastrophe, and we're still here, still thriving, still asking questions about where we came from and where we're going, still wondering about the mysteries written in our genes, still carrying the story forward, one generation at a time. If you are drifting off now, that is perfect. Let this mystery settle into your dreams. The genetic bottleneck we can't explain. The catastrophe that almost ended us. The survival that made us who we are. Here is something else to consider as you drift off. The genetic bottleneck didn't just affect our ancestry, it shaped our psychology too. When populations crash, certain personality types might be more likely to survive. The survivors wouldn't be random samples of the original population. Some researchers speculate that the bottleneck selected for social anxiety, the tendency to worry about what others think of you, to try hard to fit in with your group. In a tiny population where everyone depends on everyone else, social outcasts would have died. Being well-liked was a survival skill. Others suggest it's selected for hypervigilance, the tendency to scan constantly for threats, to imagine worst-case scenarios. In a world where danger could come from anywhere, the paranoid survived while the carefree perished. Our anxiety might be the gift of ancestors who worried enough to stay alive. And perhaps it's selected for storytelling, the ability to imagine scenarios, plan for future events, and share experiences through narrative. The groups that could tell stories about past dangers and future possibilities might have navigated the crisis better than those who couldn't. These are speculations, of course. We can't know for certain what psychological traits the bottleneck favored, but it is intriguing to think that your personality, your anxieties, your vigilance, your imagination might carry echoes of the catastrophe your ancestors survived. Tomorrow, the mystery will still be here. Scientists will still be working on it, finding new evidence, proposing new theories, and you'll still carry the answer in every cell of your body, even if we don't yet know how to read it completely. Thanks for spending this time with me tonight, thinking about our shared ancestors, and our shared survival. If you want more mysteries to fall asleep to, subscribe and stick around. There are plenty more where this came from. Good night, sleep well, and remember, you are a survivor. It is in your genes.